Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Hey, really glad you're with us for the Tuesday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. We've got good, bad, and crazy martinis for conservatives today. Glad you're here. The stool is prepared. And Jim, to my knowledge, it's still early here on Tuesday, but I don't think President Biden has referred to either of us as a stupid SOB today. But, you know, the day is still young.
You know, Greg, for all we know, he may have intended to and simply forgot. The only other thing I have to say about this, Greg, is that right now I think Peter Doocy is just the coolest guy in the entire world because the president said something rude, ironically using a phrase that the previous president had used, and we were told that that was a threat to the First Amendment and a sign of a raging autocrat, and democracy was dying in darkness and all that stuff. And now that Biden did it, many, but not all, journalists who are left of center were like, "Yeah, it's fine. Doocy had it coming. It's no big deal." In a world where everybody is trained to flop like a soccer player whenever anybody does something wrong to them and to maximize the attention and maximize the outrage, I just think Doocy is the coolest guy in the world to say, yeah, you know, they say he made a joke that, you know, the fact checkers haven't weighed in yet, so it may not be a lie. Like, just laughing it off and blowing it off as no big deal, I just think is like it's such a refreshing change of pace in a high dudgeon people who yearn for victimhood like it's crack cocaine. The president should not be calling, reporters an SOB, but, you know, the fact that he did, what in a week, who's going to remember this? What difference does it make, to quote a famous former Secretary of State? And so, you know, good for you, Doocy. Man's got a healthy view of the world. He's not going to play up for it. Apparently Biden did call him, tell him it was nothing personal, which is, you know, fine, great, all that kind of stuff. But, and now I've spent way more time talking about it than I intended to, Greg.
So, as Doocy has said, it's over. Let's move on. So that's exactly what we're going to do. On to the good martini now. And Jim, we talked a little over a week ago on the first Monday of Glenn Youngkin's governorship here in Virginia. He was off to a strong start. And one of the reasons is because he was doing exactly what he said he would do. And he is giving parents the power over their kids' education, including whether or not they're going to wear masks in schools. As we easily predicted, because I think by the time we spoke on Monday, some school districts had already promised to sue. 7 of them are, most of them in Northern Virginia. No surprise. Fairfax, Prince William, Arlington, City of Alexandria, Falls Church, Richmond, and Hampton are all suing on this. But as you point out in the Morning Jolt today, while the liberals think they've got the upper hand on this because they've actually got a statute on the books which would override the governor's executive order, there are some legal experts out there that say, you know what, this executive order was actually written in a very careful and effective way because it doesn't actually override the law. And so, as you also point out, if these more blue-leaning districts don't at least start to get on the off-ramp, which is now the hot word, for ending mask mandates, you might see the state legislature, with a little bit of help from the Democrats in the state Senate, override the existing law if that's what it comes to. So either way, I think we're headed in a good place.
Greg, at the risk of using one of my most habitual cliches of declaring that there's a lot to unpack here, there is a lot to unpack here. And rarely have I written a Morning Jolt in which readers have really hated the beginning of an argument or laying out a series of facts, but they love the conclusion. The conclusion is that Glenn Youngkin is going to win this fight eventually. It's just a question of how and when. The first thought at the beginning is, so if you ask parents who are concerned about masks right now and still want their kids wearing masks and are very upset about the thought of other parents sending their kids to school without masks, I've been asking them, like, so what would you need to see to feel comfortable either having your kid in school without a mask or having other kids in school without a mask? And invariably the answer is, I want to see the cases go down, some version of that. We're past the Omicron wave, but not really all that far past it. I think you got at least probably another 2-3 weeks, and then you're going to, see back to pre-Omicron wave numbers. The hospitalization rate is actually at or near the record number, and it's surpassed the previous high, I want to say around January 12th or so, right? So if we're not at the peak, we're just past it. We still got another couple of weeks. But what we've seen from the Omicron wave in other parts of the United States and overseas, the Omicron wave cases go up really, really fast, hit the peak, and then they come down really, really fast. In fact, they've come down from about 120,000. I want to say that was like the second week of January, somewhere in there. down to about 57,000 cases, I think was the most recent number in the 7-day average. That number is going to keep going down. So if Youngkin's position looks unreasonable now, but I think it is reasonable. But if there are parents who are like, you can't do this when the cases are so high. Well, the cases are going to be down a week from now, 2 weeks from now, and they're really going to be down a month from now. And going to be even more 6 weeks, even more 8 weeks. So the strongest counter argument they have, you don't want to remove the mask mandate at a time when cases are so high, is going to gradually, in fact, maybe rapidly erode day by day, week by week over the coming weeks here. That, I think, is going to affect the thinking of a judge. Now, Ilya Shapiro, who is a smarter guy than I am and who knows the law better than I am, says that this thing is written with this law in mind. Any judge is going to uphold it. I'm not as confident as he is. I just think it's just too easy for a judge to say, CDC guidelines say kids should be masked, and these schools say they're simply following the CDC guidelines. The mask mandates can stay. I think at this point, I just don't know which way a judge would rule. It's a bit like, some of the times we've had, frustrations with the Supreme Court and not knowing how the swing justice is going to decide. I just don't know if you can count on that. But the announcement from Chap Peterson, who ironically I believe is my state senator, at least unless they move the district lines. He's a Democrat. He's a relatively moderate one. He wears a bow tie, and his first name is Chap. So he is the most Republican-appearing Democrat you've ever seen in the state legislature. But he is one of the guys who really believed we had to reopen schools. As far as state Senate Democrats go, he's probably one of the better ones. And earlier this month, he had actually written an op-ed with the chair of the school board, I believe, for Prince William County, saying, look, we've got to have some sort of criteria for how we're going to say, okay, kids, you don't need to wear masks anymore. He wasn't saying it had to be immediate. Schools have to lay out what their criteria is, presumably in case numbers or hospitalization numbers or something like that, to which they can say, okay, you don't have to wear a mask anymore. Well, Chap Peterson now says if there is not if school districts don't start putting out these kinds of clarity, this kind of understanding of what the off-ramp, so to speak, is, then at some point the state legislature is going to act. Right now, Democrats have a 21-19 split in their favor, but you should not automatically assume that all Republicans are pro-demasking and all Democrats are anti-demasking, because Chap Peterson, if he votes with Republicans, would turn it into a 20-20 split. The tie would be broken by the lieutenant governor, and if that were to shake out, Glenn Youngkin would have this giant symbolic victory over state Senate Democrats. If you're a Democrat, you're going to lose this fight. The question is, do you want to lose this fight in a vote in the state legislature that's probably going to come back and be used against you? Or do you want to have, say the local school boards, guys, you're going to lose this fight eventually. Better that you guys say, all right, here's our criteria for demasking. Here, when cases get down to this level in our community, we're going to allow kids to walk around without using masks. And that would be the effective surrender. But one way or another, the mask rules are going to end at these schools. As I put it today, it's just a question of how and a question of when. And my guess is sooner rather than later.
Here's my question on this, Jim. You laid out the data and mentioned the CDC guidance and so forth. I'm not sure why that should matter. Its legality should not be determined whether it's a good idea. It should be determined about whether it's constitutional. And so the question is whether or not the statute overrides the executive order, or the executive order can be applied and does not contradict a statute. While I think a lot of people, especially on the left, would love to see a little more weighting on this, I don't understand why the CDC guidance factors into whether something's legal.
Well, the law says schools should be following the CDC guidance as much as practical or applicable. And so the question is, are the mask mandates practical and applicable? But a good example of what you're describing there, Greg, had just happened up in New York State, where a judge up in New York just said that the governor cannot enact mask mandates in schools and public buildings all by herself, because this is goes beyond the emergency powers. I talked a little bit about this in the Morning Jolt too, saying that we are 2 years into this pandemic. You should not be operating on emergency powers anymore. If we're 2 years in, it's not an emergency anymore, and these things should be passed by legislatures that we can vote out of office if we think their decision making is stupid. And that Hochul was furious about this, and I'm just trying to stand up for public health. It's like, well, look, a public health problem does not turn you into a dictator. You do not get to make the rules willy-nilly all by yourself based on what you and your public health experts say. We have a legislature for a reason, and their job is not to be a rubber stamp. So I think in the end, this is going to be a similar story here in Virginia. I don't think a judge is going to say, and the executive order can, nullify this interpretation of the state law. When the state Democrats realize they're going to lose this in the state legislature, I think they'll call up the school boards and say, hey, adjust your policies. Give them an off ramp, because we really don't want to take this loss. Because if you don't think Youngkin having a win here isn't going to be national news, this is going to be a huge victory for Republicans heading into the midterms that already look bad for Democrats.
Interesting to see how this will play out. Fascinating politics, and whether it'll be a big political deal or less than a big political deal. But in the meantime, rest up. We should get a decision from the state Supreme Court pretty quickly on this. At least that's what we've been hearing, so it might even be this week. But rest up on your MyPillow, your Giza Dream Sheets. Walk around in your slippers and just relax. We got a lot of big political fights coming up, so you want to be comfortable. And right now, the good news from MyPillow, in addition to their quality products, is that you can get the new My Slippers at 40% off the normal price when you use our promo code MARTINI at checkout when you go to mypillow.com.
These slippers have spent 2 years in development to ensure the highest quality and comfort. They're designed to be worn all day, indoors, outdoors, or wherever you like. These slippers are available in moccasin or slip-on style, and they're available in a variety of colors and sizes. The My Slippers are made with quality leather suede, an exclusive 3-tier cushioning system. This includes the MyPillow patented fill, the impact gel, and the memory foam.
For a limited time, MyPillow is offering 40% off the new My Slippers. Go to mypillow.com and click on the radio listeners square. Enter the promo code MARTINI or call 800-874-0104. Now, while you're there, don't forget to take advantage of the deep discounts on all MyPillow products, including the Giza Dream bed sheets, the MyPillow mattress topper, and the MyPillow towel sets. And, of course, the slippers. But you can only save 40% on the new My Slippers with our promo code MARTINI. So use that code MARTINI when you call 800-874-0104 or when you go to mypillow.com. All right, Jim, on to our bad martini now. And for that, we head back over across the Atlantic Ocean and the dread that's building about the intentions that Russia has over Ukraine. Oh, but fear not, Jim, because the European Union is on the case. And if there's anything we can count on from the European Union, it's unified, bold, clear action. No, I'm just kidding, of course. Politico Europe reporting that the EU foreign ministers struggling on Monday to portray a united front against Russia as tensions simmered behind the scenes over supplying weapons to Ukraine and over a proposed military training mission. As the ministers gathered in Brussels for a meeting that included a conversation with U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken via video link, a split emerged between the EU and the U.S. over the evacuation of diplomats from Kiev. Meanwhile, the EU's foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell, insisted, and this is my favorite part, that the 27 member states and their allies were completely in lockstep, Jim, on the need for a package of high-impact sanctions to be imposed on Russia in the event of an attack on Ukraine. But that cohesion was largely made possible by not discussing any specific details about the draft measures, delaying potentially fierce disagreements. So is there anything more government, Jim, than we are united? About the details, we have no idea.
Greg, this sounds an awful lot like double secret probation from Animal House. We're going to punish Putin, but the punishment's going to be so bad we can't even talk about it. You're not even allowed to know about it. That's how severe it is. Take that in your face there, Vladimir Putin. Look, on the one hand, this is not surprising. You know, there are a lot of reports about Germany being extraordinarily unenthusiastic about lifting a finger towards Vladimir Putin on a variety of issues. They have extensive trade ties with the Russians. They have denied overflight right. It was like they didn't say to the British, you cannot fly munitions over our airspace if you want to deliver them to Ukraine. But they said that to do so, they'd require, special permission due to enhanced risk over, heaven forbid something happens to the airplane or something like that. So the Royal Air Force said, we're just not going to apply for that. We're just going to fly around German airspace. Now, somebody said, okay, so Germany didn't really ban it. But here's the thing. They could have said to the Royal Air Force, oh, don't worry, we'll expedite this. We'll get this taken care of real fast. We want to get those weapons to Ukraine as quickly as possible. The fact that they didn't is a sign that Germany really doesn't want to, it's not going to lift a finger to help arm Ukraine. They're really not as interested in defending Ukraine as the other members of both NATO and the EU. At minimum, it's the Germans who aren't on board with this. The other really intriguing thing, and I could go on at really great length with this, but the short version is there's a system called SWIFT. And it's basically the computer system that basically connects banks all around the world. So if you're in one country and you need to send money to another country, SWIFT is the system that operates that. And if you cut off a country from SWIFT, you basically make it almost impossible to get money in and out of the country. This is kind of the, I don't say the nuclear bomb of financial sanctions, but when people talk about most sanctions, if you're Vladimir Putin, it's not really going to touch you. If you're wealthy enough in Russia, sanctions are really not going to bother you too much. Maybe travel restrictions might, or something like that, if you want to, send your kid to a U.S. university or something like that. But by and large, it's, there's a reason sanctions never really touch the rich and powerful. The SWIFT restrictions would, but the SWIFT, I believe, is operating out of Belgium, the Netherlands, one of the Low Countries, and technically, the Belgian government, one of the Low Countries governments, could apply pressure on SWIFT to either enact those restrictions or to not enact those restrictions. And it's not 100% sure that everybody in Europe is on board with this, because a lot of countries in Europe do a lot of business with Russia. We're not even getting into access to oil and gas and all the other energy supplies from Russia and stuff like that. So the European Union, I understand, it's kind of one of those ideas that people might think, some people hate it entirely. It's lovely in theory, but really difficult in practice. I think in the end, most people, citizens of European countries, do not see themselves as Europeans. It's an entirely artificial construct. And it's understandable if you're on a continent that has had all kinds of histories of wars, and then you lead it to World War I, and then you lead it to World War II. This desire of, oh my goodness, every time the Germans get really nationalistic, they try to borrow Poland for a few decades, and all of this sense of like, okay, we got to tamp down nationalism. But unfortunately, the European identity only seems to take root in a certain cosmopolitan elite, folks who really do see themselves as quote unquote citizens of the world. In the end, the French see themselves as French. The average German sees himself as German. So the idea that Europe could speak with one voice, it's going to be really rare for circumstances like that. And Russia invading Ukraine is not going to be one that we're not unified here in the United States. A lot of Americans don't like it. Very big differences about how far we should go in our level of opposition to it. And there are a decent number of people who say, you know what? Ukraine has always been close to Russia. They have all kinds of cultural ties. They have linguistic ties. It's always going to matter more to Russia than it is to us. Let them sort it out. That is a formula to have the strong dominate the weak. I don't really like that philosophy, but at least I can understand where it's coming from. The European Union, in a real genuine major foreign policy crisis, even at its doorstep or in its backyard or whichever house metaphor you prefer, the European Union is not proving to be a leader on this issue, because it cannot lead. Because to lead, you need to be clear on what you want, and to do that, you need to be unified. Ironically, Greg, there is no union in the European Union.
Yes, very little, and especially when it comes to arming the Ukrainians. I know there's probably a pretty intense debate in our own country about how much the U.S. should be supporting them weapons-wise. I would argue that it is infinitely better than sending American forces over there. I don't think very many Americans at all have the appetite for that. But given what we know about Ukraine, Jim, I feel like we've gotten into a bad track record here of convincing certain countries to give up nuclear weapons, or at least weapons of mass destruction in the case of Libya. And then when they actually agree to do it, turns out things don't go very well for them. So I'm not sure how many other countries down the road we're going to be able to convince to not pursue nukes or other devastating weapons.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's looking like a bad deal, huh?
Yeah, they're not going to.
Lesson, but if you've got nukes, never give them up. That is the unfortunate lesson we are communicating to the world right now. We have your back, depending on our own domestic political considerations and who's president.
Yes, that's not a.
There's an asterisk at the end of that statement that you got to look real close to see.
All right, let's look at our crazy martini now. And I wish this was a silly crazy. It's not. It's a bad crazy. Let's talk about our southern border. For some reason, it took until January 24th for the Biden administration to cough up the number of illegals crossing in the month of December. And now that we actually see the numbers, it's not hard to see why. The number of migrant encounters, as it's termed, in December stood at 178,840. That's an increase, Jim, of 141.6% from the same month in 2020, which was during a pandemic, and up 340.8% from December 2019, obviously pre-pandemic. So the numbers are horrific. By the time we get through January, it's going to be 2 million illegal immigrants apprehended. And that's just the ones they got at the border. There's plenty of what they call gotaways down there, too. We also see, thanks to Hot Air for aggregating this, that 14 people in the last year who are on the terrorist watch list have been apprehended. And some in Washington will say, hey, the system's working. We got the terrorists. Did you get all of them? Are you sure? And the one bright spot...
Well, we'll know soon enough.
The one bright spot, according to Hot Air, is a decline in the encounters with unaccompanied children. 14% drop there, except that there's a 15% increase in encounters with family units, which means there are still kids caught in the crosshairs here. But, Jim, what do you make of these just never-ending record numbers, it seems, and a Biden administration that has done absolutely nothing about it?
I was going to say, for a while, each time these monthly reports would come out, you'd see stories to say, I wrote plenty of times in the corner, Biden insisted this was just part of the regular seasonal pattern. It was not. Now you see that his, basically this message has gone out through all of Central America, get to the United States. I strongly suspect this is tied to the fact that the perception that Biden is not enforcing immigration policies the way his predecessor did, and the perception that an amnesty is in the works someday. I actually don't think that is likely to come to pass, at least not, particularly if Republicans win back the House and Senate. Central America believes that if they get here, fast enough, they can get grandfathered in, they'll get a road to life path to citizenship, they get to live in the United States and not have to deal with all the problems of Central America anymore. So, the interesting question is Biden, he's taken a hit on this issue. I think the poll I saw yesterday said that 59% disapprove of his handling of border security, just 37% approve. And I'm assuming the 37% who answered yes, I approve of how Biden is approving border security. Greg, it turns out 36% of them were illegal immigrants. The remaining 1% were coyotes and people smugglers. So really, those are the folks who love what he's doing there. So he's taking a bad hit on this. Maybe if you're Biden, that's acceptable. It certainly isn't such a problem that he does feel desperate to go to the border, to announce new funding, to announce that they're going to, we made a mistake, to go ahead with border fence construction. All these things, nothing has been bad enough to make him rethink the course that he's on. Now, I think this is going to be a big contributing factor in a red wave / red tsunami in the midterm elections. But maybe if you're Joe Biden, it's worth it. Or, maybe he's just still muttering about Ducey under his breath, Greg.
Jim, do you think this issue is like guns and some other issues where, look, if you care about guns, you're going to vote that way, one way or the other. It doesn't really matter who the candidates are. If you really care about the border and border security, you're going to vote that way, no matter where the situation stands right now. So how many people who are very likely to vote for Democrats in a vacuum would change it over the border? I would like to think it's a lot, considering the national security implications, but I'm just not sure.
I think your assessment is in the ballpark there, Greg, that it's tough to believe there are that many people who would flip from Democrat to Republican just because of this issue. But I don't think this issue occurs in a vacuum. When you talk to these focus groups, there's just this general sense that, Joe Biden was elected to get us back to normal. And that meant on a whole bunch of fronts. But, I think, most notably on COVID-19, the pandemic. I think obviously President Trump brought his own problems, his own baggage, his own circus to town. I think with Obama, when trying to make the pitch for Joe Biden at one point, said, won't it be a relief to, wake up in the morning and not have to worry about what the president did? Well, we're not in that state. We're not, and you throw in inflation, you throw in gas prices, you throw in food prices, you throw in the supply chain crisis. I think the border crisis, kind of just adds to this burgeoning sense of chaos. This sense that Biden has not made us back to normal, and in fact may have even taken us further away from normal, because we've got problems that are completely we've never had a supply chain crisis like this in the United States before. We've had gas surges and stuff like that. This is probably right up there. Maybe in 2008, I remember summer 2008, it was really bad on gas prices. People don't remember seeing empty shelves on stores like this, and obviously we never had. We've had the pandemic before. We're starting in March 2020. But what's weird is that the problem of Omicron, thankfully less deadly, but having lots of people getting sick all at the same time, and staying home from work at the same time is creating whole new kinds of problems that we have not really seen before. So really, I think the border adds to this just general sense that Biden is overwhelmed. That Biden is, he makes them, and then throw Afghanistan, right? Biden makes a decision and is convinced it's going to work out. And no matter how bad it gets, he just completely commits. No, this is the right path. Just you wait, just you give it time. And that's where we are. So I think it's by itself, it's not going to change votes. I think in this whole plethora of problems that seem to be getting worse, that, Greg, is where it's going to really hurt Democrats in the midterms.
Well, we'll find out. I think, the cumulative effect is certainly hitting him in his poll numbers right now. We'll see if it results in the same kind of numbers when it comes to other Democrats on the ballot. But time will tell. It's going to be sooner than you think. We're just a little over 9 months away now from midterm election day 2022. But if history's any guide, we got a lot to go through between now and then. So, Jim, happy Tuesday. See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow, Greg.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today. Do subscribe to the podcast if you don't already. Also, tell your friends about us. We'd love to have them join us each day as well. Thank you so much for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews on the 3 Martini Lunch. Those always help us. Get us on those home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. And follow us on Twitter. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Dateline_DC. Have a terrific Tuesday, and please join us on Wednesday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.